On today's podcast, we sat down with legendary veteran musician Rudy Sarzo. Rudy, as you know, has played with Quiet Riot, Ozzy Osbourne, Whitesnake, as well as many other bands. We discussed his incredible and varied career that's still going strong today. We talked about the mindset that you need as an independent musician, joining a band, being a sideman. We talked about how to understand your role in each of those situations. We talked about, rituals for touring. We talked about how the reliability and the trust factor among musicians, especially the ones who are hiring you, is sometimes even more important than your talent level. Because if they can't rely on you, you're never going to get the gig. A lot of great stuff in this one. You don't want to miss it. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down with legendary veteran musician Rudy Sarzo, who has played with Quiet Riot, Ozzy Osbourne, Whitesnake, and others. We discussed his incredible and varied career that's still going strong today, the mindset you need to join a band, and how lasting in the music industry is about being aware of your role in the situation that you're in, and much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source, serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com. What do Whitesnake, Ozzy Osbourne, and Quiet Riot all have in common? Our featured guest this week, legendary bassist Rudy Sarzo. This was a great interview. I really enjoyed this. This was a conversation with a real journeyman. Yeah,
he has been at this for a long time, and what I loved was just the way he expressed his whole dedication to music. That it was a way of life for him right from the very beginning. Coming over from Cuba, coming from Florida to Miami, from Miami to Los Angeles, that journey. I love the way he, it was so interesting to me the way he spoke about the mindset that you needed to have to join a band as a hired gun, and some of the differences between, that being a hired gun and being a member. Right. And the differences, and how he spoke about, the inspiration that Randy Rhoads was to him. He says, I wouldn't have a career.
Yeah, absolutely.
And talks about that, and surviving the road, how he has survived the road sane, as a sane man all these years, and, and he's seen his share of destruction in
absolutely. That. And, I have a lot of points to go over because this for me was personal because I've known Rudy for a long time. His lasting in the music industry, and what I thought was brilliant about what he said is about being aware of your role in the situation that you're in. And it goes back to being a team player. When I think about being a team player, I think about Rudy Sarzo. I mean, in the outfits that he's been in, 3 of the biggest bands on the face of the planet, and being a team player and how important that is. And one of the other points that I thought was really interesting, what he said during the interview that I just recalled now was, how he talked about being in the scene in Los Angeles at the Rainbow, which still exists today. But during that time, pre-social network, how that was the social network of that time and how people were communicating and interacting, and how he talked about that the women were very connected with the whole thing with the bands, and they were putting, they were kind of like the operators and plugging in, one guy with this guy and one guy with the other. And so I thought it was just a very, very interesting take on, his thing. And then also about the biggest, most admirable thing about what he said was about having trust, honesty, and having the dependability. I think that's what made him survive so long as he's had and thrived.
Absolutely. And how those qualities are the things that kept his career going. That if you don't have those, and I remember so specifically when he talked about, the ability to trust another player.
Right.
He felt that, he even said this in there, that it's more important than
the technical skills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He said, because if we can't trust them, that he's going to show up, or that, they're going to be there.
And that's why him and Randy had such a huge bond together and why it was so successful.
Exactly.
Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Rudy Sarzo.
Rudy, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. How are you guys doing?
Doing very, very well. Doing really good. How about you?
I'm doing great.
Good. I'd like to start by asking at the beginning of your own life to go back, and I want to get, at what point in your life did you know that music was going to be your professional career path?
Well, I guess by the time that I decided to move to Los Angeles, or pretty much leave Miami, where I had been living, most of my life after my family left Cuba in 1961. So by the time I left Miami, I knew that music was going to be my career, basically. What kind of a path where it was going to lead me to, I did not know. But I had a lot of faith and to continue and through the struggles, of trying to survive on the road. Because basically, once I left Miami, I considered myself going on the road. And I did not have a steady home, basically, until I was in Quiet Riot when I bought my first house in 1984. So it was basically a 10-year journey, from the time that I left Miami, like around 1974 to 1984 when I bought my first home. And then I knew that I was going to be a California resident for good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. This is Eric, by the way. It's such an honor to have you on the show. So I wanted to ask you and you were speaking about this in the previous answer that you were giving. And I asked this because obviously I'm Cuban American. I was born here in the States, but my family immigrated, I think, on or around the same time that you came and they, settled in Miami. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, what was it like coming to the U.S. as a child who grew up in Cuba? Was that like a big culture shock? I mean, I know at the time there was a lot of stuff going down with, Castro and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just curious, how was that for you?
Well, I mean, I can only give you the reference of two places that my family moved to. First was Miami. We were there for about a couple of years before we were relocated to New Jersey. There was a relocation program through the Catholic Church that you were given choices of places to move to, anywhere from Los Angeles to Chicago to Alaska. They were looking for people to work at the pipeline up there, and so my parents figured, well, if we go to New Jersey, if anything, if we change our mind, we can always drive back down to Miami. So we stayed there for about 3 years, from 63 to around 60, middle of 67. So, by the time I got to Jersey in 63, I was there to experience, the shock of Kennedy getting shot, and I was in school. I was there for the Beatles, coming to Ed Sullivan and, all of that, all of those different changes. And, in Miami in 1961, 62, it was completely different from what it is now. There was not that huge Latin community that exists now. And it was very different, very little jobs. Most of the jobs were either having to in the tourist trade, which is, working in a hotel, or my dad got a job with building boats, yachts. His job was like the least desirable one, which is basically jumping into a water tank with a boat and sanding the fiberglass, I believe today that would be considered a toxic job. But back then in 61, there was no protection. He's just jumping the tank and started sanding away. He would come home with fiberglass in all his pores in his body. And it was tough, very tough. And so that's why my family decided to move to New Jersey, just to have better opportunities, to make a living. And so I didn't. By the time we moved to New Jersey, is where I encounter more ethnic varieties. In New Jersey and West New York, particularly, there was a lot of Italians and Puerto Ricans, and basically that urban New York City, New Jersey feel. So it was really interesting, because before that, in Miami, it was basically the very few initial Cubans that had left right after the 1959 revolution, New Year's Eve.
Right.
There were the ones who, the Batista era. Those Cubans were the ones who actually, were the upper class who had homes in Miami, like vacation homes. So their vacation homes became their steady homes. That's where they moved to. And so that was one, that was a lot of the Cubans that I met in school. Their families were from that wealthy background, that now the kids were going to public school and trying to deal with assimilating, having lost all of their, businesses and the family, properties, all the homes and whatever else they happen to own in Cuba, and starting all over again. And the rest were basically just, Americans, just, your average Miami Americans that live, in Miami. So by the time that my family moved to New Jersey is where I started to experience more of a diverse ethnic backgrounds. And it was pretty interesting. It was something that I understood very quickly at the age of 11 was in order to survive, which became kind of like that generation of Cubans. It was more of we were all in survival mode. How are we going to survive this? How are we going to assimilate? We knew that assimilation was an essential tool to our survival. Especially in a country where there were less ethnic groups.
Definitely. Yeah.
Back in 1960, early 60s, 63 by the time we moved to West New York.
And I know people weren't very happy either. I mean, there was a lot of racism going on at the time. I could tell my stories of my family telling me this stuff that was happening to them, in the schools, and like what you said, trying to assimilate. Yeah.
Well, I mean, recently I was on a flight and I decided to watch West Side Story, and I'm looking at it, today, because I've seen it so many times, but it did not, every time you watch a movie, you can get a different thing, out of it. And the storyline was pretty much that, and it was, this is a land, unless you're a Native American, everybody's an immigrant. But, there's, for example, in West Side Story, you have I think there were Polish and Italians, the Jets. They were there, they got there first, right? So they're just basically preserving their turf. And then, the Puerto Ricans come in and they want to be part of that. They want a piece of the turf, I mean, of course, we're talking about a movie, but that storyline was very true to life, in urban cities, such as where I live in West New York.
I want to sort of move to when you came out to LA from Miami. The LA scene, was very heavy into showcasing bands for record labels at that time. And the club scene was rather small then, comparatively speaking to today. And what I'm curious about is when you came to LA, when you arrived, can you talk to us about how you were able to connect with other working musicians in the community at that time?
Yeah, of course, we did not have the advantage of social network, with the internet like we have today. So, but there was a social network back then. It was called a place called the Rainbow.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, which is still there. Yeah.
It's still there, and also. I would say just going to clubs every night and mingling and meeting people, and also. You might be surprised about this, but females, the ladies that were hanging around that scene, they knew everybody. And they were always welcoming because people were coming in, musicians were coming in every day. It was just from all over the United States or even the world. I mean, we had so many musicians from England at the time that had moved to Los Angeles after some of their bands broke up, because by the second half of the 70s, radio airplay in America was basically disco music. There were some stations, yes, that would play rock and roll, but disco was the sound of that time. And a lot of the English bands, they just broke up because they couldn't survive, So a lot of them wound up in Los Angeles, hanging out of the Rainbow, putting new bands together and so on,
Did you do many recording sessions during this time? Did you just hit the ground running when you got there, or how did that work?
No. I basically there were a bunch of us who had been playing in a band in the Midwest prior to moving to Los Angeles, and one of them was Frankie Banali, who wound up, who I later on played in the mental health version of Quiet Riot and so on. And the other one was Bob Marlette, who is a very well-known producer. He was our guitar player, keyboard player. So we all, wound up in Los Angeles. I drove to L.A. with Bob, and from Lincoln, Nebraska, in his family's station wagon. Yeah. And so we actually put a band together, and here in Los Angeles, and we did one gig. But out of that gig, we got a lot of connections. But anyways, during that time, I actually met Quiet Riot. I actually watched Kevin and Randy and Drew and Kelly, who were, that version of the band, performing at the Starwood. And I bumped into Kevin after their show, and I told him how much I really enjoyed it, and that they were on the right track. I mean, because even when Quiet Riot was playing clubs, they had a arena approach to their presentation, and which was very rare. There was a lot of bands that I saw playing in clubs that just came off as club bands, and very few that actually came off as arena bands, and they were one of the very few. So, I just told him that, not thinking anything else, but say, hey, you guys are on the right track, and I just moved on. And later on, when they started looking for a bass player, I happened to be out of town, but getting ready to return to Los Angeles. So I got a call from Kevin. He tracked me down, and he called me in New Jersey. I went to New Jersey again to stay with my brother and my sister-in-law. They had a band there. And so I was working with them, getting some money together, playing clubs until I got enough money to return to Los Angeles. And it just so happened that they were looking for a bass player at the same time, Quiet Riot. And so, after he called me, I returned to LA within a week. I auditioned for the band, and I got in Quiet Riot, and that's how people got to, really know how I play, because we only did one gig with Frankie and Bob Marlette in Los Angeles, so nobody really had any idea, because there were so many musicians hanging around but not gigging at all, and so nobody got to watch him perform. And it wasn't until Quiet Riot that any, the local network of musicians got to actually know, about my playing abilities.
Interesting. Let me ask you, Rudy, you once said that lasting in the music industry is about being aware of your role in the situation that you're in. You've worked with Ozzy Osbourne, Quiet Riot, Whitesnake, Dio, Blue Oyster Cult, just to name a few. Can you talk about the mindset that you need as a musician to join a band? Because, I think a lot of the musicians just think of it as a job, but it's much bigger than a job.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to think about it as a job, I mean, put it this way: if you treat your band like a job, the audience is going to know about it. I mean, they're gonna see you play, watch you play on stage, and go, oh, okay, this guy's just gigging. He's not giving it beyond. There's no passion. How many people really have passion at their jobs? A lot of people just show up and, punch in their time card and then just get out and go home, and might not even have any passion about life, and you have to be passionate about your playing. I never call it a job. To me, it's not a job, because I play. I don't work. I play, and I love what I do. And if you love what you do, it's going to come off that way. The audience. See, I play for the audience. I play for the celebration of everybody showing up, not just the band, but the audience. I mean, without the audience, it's just a sound check, And it doesn't matter to me if there's 10 people or 10,000 people. If there's 10 people, well, it's not their fault that the other 9,990 people did not show up. It's I'm going to give you the show that you not only pay for, but sacrifice everything else just to be there. And it's because I've been a fan longer than I've been a professional musician. I know what it's like to be a fan. I know what it's like to, leave your house, buy, stand in line to buy the ticket, drive in traffic to find a parking spot. All of this, just to watch that show, and when I watch the show, I want to see something magical. I want that special moment that I'm at the show and I go, oh my God, this is so awesome. I'm sure this has just happened tonight.
Right.
So it's not scripted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want that spontaneity and that magical element to a performance. And I'm still a fan. I'll be a fan even after I stop playing for whatever reason. And so I approach it like that. I have that passion of the fan who just happened to get that opportunity to, you've been a fan for so long. Now is your time to get up on stage and do what you've been watching other musicians do.
Yeah. And let me ask you a follow-up to that question. Some of those situations that you were, were already established, some of the bands that you were in, and some you were in on quite early. Can you talk about your role in each of those particular bands?
Oh, okay. Can you give me
well, like an Ozzy, Quiet Riot, and Whitesnake. I mean, there were all kind of situations that were kind of already happening.
Yeah. Yeah, well, with Ozzy, what Ozzy had happening with him by the time that I joined the band was that 2 records had already been recorded. His place in the industry was not defined yet because he had yet to make a name for himself as a solo artist, which is very hard, especially following such a iconic band like Black Sabbath, And so that was a very, I have not been in a situation like that afterwards. where you have something like that, and, so for me, it was basically, I had a role. And my role was Ozzy. They're establishing first it was called the Blizzard of Oz, and then it became Ozzy Osbourne, the Blizzard of Oz. Then it just became Ozzy Osbourne. Sometimes, and usually that is just the industry will make those calls. Basically, sometimes it's easier to promote one person than it is a whole band. Because especially if it's the singer, because, musicians will move on and still that brand remains the same.
Exactly.
And so, they do things like that, especially if there's a woman in the band. They'll go, wow, it's easier to sell this female, let's say Janis Joplin. It is an early story in music. Janis Joplin, it was Big Brother and the holding company, and then it became Janis Joplin and Big Brother, whatever. And then it was just Janis Joplin, because it's so much easier just to promote and, market Janis Joplin. It's a no-brainer for the business people at the record company to do that, and, so, with Ozzy, it was that type of a situation. It was something that it was very focused. Thanks to Sharon Osbourne, she worked. She worked very hard to get Ozzy to where he is at today, and. But the band, she always treated the band, and so did Ozzy, as a band. It was not a backup band. We never, we all traveled together, stayed at the same hotels, and we got the same treatment. As a matter of fact, we shared the same dressing room while I was in the band, And so I moved on, with Quiet Riot, and Quiet Riot, we were all members. We all owned the brand at the time, and. So that was a whole different dynamics, and then Whitesnake, it was there was a certain business arrangement that we had that we were not necessarily hired hands, and so, each situation has its dynamics, it's all very different.
Rudy, in your experience, how important, because, it's interesting listening to you, because you're speaking about a lot of different experiences that you've had in different situations with Ozzy, with Quiet Riot, with Whitesnake, with the arrangements. And I'm curious, in your experience, how important is trust, honesty, and dependability versus just the pure musical talent of members when people are putting a band together?
Yeah, I say this over and over again. Trust is the most important ingredient. Obviously, I'm talking about people that can play. Obviously, if you're in Los Angeles and you're seriously, making music your career, you're going to be a musician of a high level, skill levels. Okay, that's taken for granted, but the musician that is going to get the band, that position that that they're trying to fill, is the musician that they already know and trust. As a matter of fact, lately in LA, let me just rephrase that. There is a trend nowadays for solo artists. If you look at it from country music, pop music, and so on, even in urban. There's not many hip hop bands. There's hip hop artists. There's DJs. There's collaborations among, different solo artists. And so it's the same thing in country music. Maybe not as much in rock, but then rock is doesn't get the same attention as does, country music. Something more mainstream. Pop, you'd be called, talking about Lady Gaga and Taylor Swift and Katy Perry and, and so on. And what's happening is in LA is there is a network of musicians that most of them went to Berkeley, and there will be one individual who happens to be the music director. So his band or her band is comprised of musicians that they went to Berkeley with. People that they know, that they grew up musically. that they trust, and these same bands may back up different artists. I know that there's a network of musicians that back, who are part of Pink's band. And when Pink is off the road, they go and they perform with Cher because they have the same management, so they can actually control, touring dates. So there's no conflict of one band, it's and a lot of times there's like a subs for these musicians if they happen to have, other opportunities. But it's definitely a network.
And that's so important to have that network. I was going to ask you, Quiet Riot broke through with a massively successful album, Metal Health, which I think has the dubious honor of being number one, the first metal record to go number one. Which sold,
actually the first debut.
The first debut, the debut, exactly. Yeah, and it sold, went on to sell 8 million copies, had a massive hit single with Come On Feel the Noise.
Actually, there's more records that were sold beyond 8. I have a diamond.
Oh, you have a certification. Okay.
So so it's beyond 10 awesome. Worldwide.
That's amazing. What did it feel like to be part of that? Were you mentally prepared, no pun intended with the words here, for that level of success?
No, I mean, especially back in the day, and I say back in the day because bands used to tour, and in the 80s.
Yeah, you cut your teeth on the road.
Yeah, well, not only that, there was really no time for additional projects or bands. There's just the average musician, no matter how successful they are today, it's expected of them to do outside projects.
Yeah, you gotta have like 2 or 3 projects now.
Yeah, because you have the time. It's not because you need the money. It's because you have the time, and you must occupy your time playing. Otherwise, it's like athletes. Athletes, I don't know if they still have this, but I remember growing up in Cuba when the major leagues in the United States, when the season was over, most players would go on to other leagues. Like there would be like the Caribbean League, what was it called, the Sugar League in Cuba. There were a lot of players from the major leagues that would go down to Cuba and play just to stay, keep your body in shape.
Keep their chops up. Yeah.
You keep your chops up. Athletes do that. So, musicians, we do that. Back in the day, it was easy because if you had a successful record, especially, let's say, as a reference, let me use Quiet Riot. Our album Metal Health came out in March of 1983. Immediately, we started touring. We went upstate to San Francisco. We did some shows with Vandenberg, Adrian Vandenberg's band. Then we came down and we got on the Scorpion tour. Now the Scorpions were warming up for the US Festival. And then by the time that we got to Denver and there was a spot on the Metal Day open, Barry Fay, the promoter, invited us to perform at the US Festival. From the US Festival, we did some shows on our own, and then we got on the ZZ Top tour. From ZZ Top, we went into the Loverboy tour, and meanwhile, we're promoting the record, doing in stores and radio, and making videos. And then from the Loverboy tour, they did not pick up our option for the second leg, so we went out headlining. It's small arenas and even big arenas like Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, and selling it out. And then we went back on tour with opening again for Iron Maiden, building it up. By now we have Come and Feel the Noise. It's on the radio. It's on not only on the radio but on MTV every half hour. Then we got on the Black Sabbath tour, and by November, the record came out in March. By November, we hit number 1. And then now that we're number 1, what do you have to do? Well, we had some prior commitments to go on tour with Judas Priest in Europe, so we did that. As soon as we came back, we started headlining. New Year's Eve of 1984. Which was basically December 31st, 1983. We headlined our first show, Cobo Hall, sold out. We had on that tour, we had Night Ranger, we had Girl School, and Saga, on and off, And that we kept touring until the record company in the spring of 1984 say, hey guys, the record has been out for a year. We need you to go back in the studio and make another record because we need to release your new record, which became Condition Critical. Yeah, in 1984 in the third quarter, which is basically the end of the summer tour. Like around August, because, there's usually 4 quarters that records used to be released. And unless it was a greatest hits or a Christmas album, you did not want to release your record on the 4th quarter. You want the latest, the 3rd quarter, And so here we go. We have 4 weeks to deliver an album. And we did that. We went back, we got off the tour, immediately went into pre-production of the album and recording it, and then, deliver it and keep doing shows because there was the demand. Now you got the festivals. And they're saying, wow, we would love to have Quiet Riot, in the festival. So while you were recording the album, you would do like one-offs here and there. And then the album comes out and you start all over again. So there was no time, for any outside projects. It's impossible. That was if you had a hit record, that was not just Quiet Riot. That was just, that was pretty normal for any band that had a hit album.
Yeah, it's, and I remember that so well because, partially too, not only the success of the album, but the success, that was a top 5 hit. Massive hit worldwide. The single, Come On Feel the Noise, massive pop radio.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, Rudy, you also had, the video, which MTV was coming into its prime at that point.
Not only was it a top 5 hit, but it was one of 5. Only there were 5 gold singles that year. And so it was not just because it was a top 5. It was a gold single. And that means 1 million. Gold singles were 1 million sales.
That's right.
Gold album was worth 500,000, platinum 1 million, and then double platinum and so on.
Right.
2 million, 3 million.
Exactly.
But as far as singles, it was a whole different count that they used to do.
Rudy, I want to shift gears here, and it's interesting because you touched on this in a previous answer about 15 minutes ago, and I just wanted to talk about it. When preparing for our conversation, I realized that you have worked with Ozzy Osbourne, David Coverdale, and Ronnie Dio, all who are brilliant frontmen from very famous, iconic bands who were able to successfully reinvent themselves and break again as solo artists, which, as you said, and which I know from my experience in the music business, is not an easy thing to do. We all can count on one hand how many people have done that. How many people have tried and, really broken or really became as big as the act that they came from. You've worked with several of them, and I'm just curious, do you ever recall having that conversation with any of them about that they were able to do that, or the difficulty of that, or just about that aspect creatively? Because it must have been an enormous challenge for those 3 people to have achieved what they've achieved.
Yeah, and it's also, a matter of a strategy, whether it was a personal strategy or a business strategy. Business meaning the management or record label made a decision of what to do, what direction for them to take. With Ozzy, it was definitely a business management decision to go from being called the band originally Blizzard of Oz to Ozzy Osbourne, because I was there during the transition, when it became Ozzy Osbourne rather than being called the Blizzard of Oz, And with Whitesnake, it was interesting because, you mentioned David having a solo career. Well, his band is Whitesnake, not David Coverdale,
Yeah.
And I think that if it goes out, and it's all branding, and I know this because, right now we're in a situation where it's very hard to break a new band, especially if you have classic or legacy musicians.
X, yeah.
Legacy musicians involved. For example, there's very few who have become successful at it. One of them is the Sons of Apollo, which is a super group.
Right. The guys from Dream Theater and Scott Soto and everybody.
Yeah. Billy Sheehan and all that. Yeah. I and at the moment I can't really recall in recent years another gathering of a supergroup that has been successful. It's because you don't get the support of labels like you used to, So a legacy brand, for a promoter guarantees that they'll be able to put the name in the marquee and people will show up. I mean, we're looking at the era where we have holograms, not just the Dio hologram. And there is a show on tour with Buddy Holly.
Yeah.
And
Bob Lefsetz just had a piece about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Roy Orbison.
Right.
Yeah. And Whitney Houston's about to go out doing this. Yeah.
So it's the brand, and it's a state, it's a reality of the business, So what happens? It's, if you look at sports teams, and of course, music is art, and you got sport to sports. But basically, when you go and watch, you go to a Dodger game, well, you do not expect Sandy Koufax to get up there and pitch.
Right.
You're a fan of the legacy. You're a fan of the memories that if you're a fan of a certain team that team has brought to you from growing up, all of that. So basically, I think music is entering that era, which is not very different from classical music. When you go to watch a symphony, an orchestra perform, let's see, Chopin, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, any symphonic music, basically it's a tribute band. Think about it, but nobody calls it that. There's very respectful would be the Boston Pops. Right. Or the LA Philharmonic.
Yeah, because I guess it's the way it's perceived. So,
yes. Yeah, performing the music of, so on, with a conductor that's not old enough to have been around 300 years ago.
Right.
To actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting take. That's an interesting take.
So we're entering that era. For example, I play in a band called The Guess Who. It's a legacy band. And I took over the original bass player. He decided he didn't want to be touring anymore. We have the original drummer. A lot of bands that we play on tour with, such as Foghat and some others that, I will have to really think hard. It's just the original, one original member, and a lot of bands don't have that. A lot of bands let's say Foreigner. Most of the time, Mick Jones does not perform with the band, but it's Foreigner, and these guys are headlining, So we're entering that era that is going to be common to experience that when you go to a show, because after all, it's a celebration of the legacy, the music, the time in our lives, the soundtrack of our lives. And a lot of times this is what happens. Your musicians start to be replaced by other musicians. Let's say when Kelly came in to Foreigner. Now Kelly Hansen was not the only singer that has replaced the original singer in Foreigner. There's a history of it. And also there's a history in Journey of different singers replacing the original vocalist, So in our case, in the Guess Who, we have members who have been in the band for 20 years. Our current singer, Derek Sharp, has been in the band for 15 years. We have a new album that came out with original the Guess Who music, performed by the band. So it's almost like continuing the legacy of the band. It doesn't mean that we're just going to stop, contributing to the library of music of the Guess Who. No, there's new songs being added by the new members of the group. And I'm just talking about the Guess Who because it's my best reference because I am in the band.
Right.
But this is something that most bands do experience. I know, as a matter of fact, I'll give you another reference. One of our guitar player, Will Ivankovich, he not only is he a co-producer and writer in our the Guess Who band, but he also co-produces and co-writes the music for Styx. Him and Tommy Shaw, they have a long history working together. So this again, it's not the original Styx band, but there's enough members. I mean, Tommy Shaw is such a great contributor. When Tommy Shaw joined Styx is when I started listening to the band because he brought that rock edge to it. He brought to me that was like when it really became a rock band. So he's still in the band, of course. And there's the original guitar player, the young, and but so some of the Chuck Panozzo, the bassist. Sometimes he tours a band, he performs a couple of songs, but the core of the band is really one original member from Styx, and then Tommy Shaw when he joined the band, which is kind of like the reinventing Styx. So it's. We're coming to that place in the industry where those situations become the norm.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Ritch, you're the founder, CEO, legend of Music Business Registry. Tell us what the Music Business Registry is all about.
Well, what it's about, Eric, is it's a company that is designed to provide the most accurate and up-to-date contact information for the music business. So if someone is looking to reach the A&R community, if someone is looking to reach music publishers, if someone needs to reach artist managers, if someone needs to reach music attorneys, if someone's looking to place their music into film and television and needs to reach all the music supervisors, that's the contact information that we provide. We've been doing it for 28 years. We're sort of the industry standard, if you will, for the music business and have been serving them since 1992. So that's what we do.
Amazing. So if I wanted to find out, let's say A&R people from Warner Brothers, let's say, I can just go in there and find that in the A&R registry?
Absolutely. You'll find all of the Warner Brothers in there. You'll find the Warner Brothers in LA, Warner Brothers in New York, Warner Brothers in Nashville, Warner Brothers in London, Warner Brothers, probably in Australia as well. So those are the main territories that we cover.
Amazing. And we're offering all of our insiders right now that are listening, if you visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount off your first order. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. Anything else you want to say, Ritch?
Well, when you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
We recently had an interview with John Kalodner, who, as you know, was instrumental in signing David and Whitesnake to Geffen.
I was there.
Yeah, and we know that he played a big role in putting the supergroup lineup together. Did you get to work with John directly during this time? And if so, what was he like to work with?
Well, I consider John a genius, and I'll tell you why. Because he's got magic ears. He knows. He knows. Yeah, I mean, and there's no gray area.
Yeah, exactly.
With John. It's either you're gonna be huge or you're not. And if John doesn't think you have the potential of being huge, I'll put it this way: with John, it's even beyond potential. He knows. He knows that if it's kind of like an equation. If you have A plus Z plus Y equals success, he knows that. He knows how to put all the elements together. And repeatedly. It's not like it's not a fluke. He did
it continuously. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a fluke with John. It's not like, one time he signed this band and they became huge. No, continuously he kept doing that until the industry just basically went away. And I worked with John, and I know the difference of what it is like to work with John and let him do what he's supposed to do or drive John away. And which is what happened during the making of A Slip of the Tongue. There were some dynamics outside of the band going on that drove John away from, making the record in the studio. So what happens? John decides, well, screw this. I'm going to go up to Vancouver and work with Aerosmith. And they came out with Pump, and if you look at the record sales, and the record sales speak for themselves. The comparison of the hit that Pump was and Slip of the Tongue, who did very well, and I'm very proud to have played on that record, did not have the success that Pump did.
Very much. Rudy, you saw the transition of music from vinyl to CD, as well as, you saw radio evolve with the birth of MTV, making, music marketing far more visual. I'm curious, from your perspective, how did this so-called perfect storm of combination of factors affect the music and live performance? I mean, as the demands on bands creatively became bigger, how did this affect the bands in terms of performing? How did it affect the whole sense of going out? Did it do something to them creatively?
Well, the biggest factor that I experienced with the transition from vinyl, and I'm going to skip cassettes because cassettes were just an extension of vinyl records with maybe one or two bonus tracks added because of the capability of adding those songs to CDs. And when CDs got extended, and so let me go back because I want to address that. Vinyl ideally was less than 20 minutes of music per side of the record. Basically, it was a physical decision. Physical meaning that the physicality of an album could only hold that much. The limitation due to the grooves, and the more minutes you added to a record, the less low end you were going to have because of the grooves. Because if you had too many grooves on the record, too deep, the needle will start to skip.
Right.
When the record played, due to the bass, and that's where certain mastering engineers. When the record got actually vinyl mastering, it was an art form because, there were certain mastering engineers who could actually maximize if your song was, if you had too much music on one side, you could actually, somehow, some way get some bottom end out of it, without losing it. Okay, so once it made the transition to CDs, the first CD was, I think it was 650 megabytes. And it was decided on that due to one of the engineers who, came up with the invention of the CD, being able to, he asked the question, how long is Beethoven's Fifth? Seriously, that was, and as long, and because they needed to put that on one CD, the whole work. So that became the norm. And then or other engineers started saying, wait a minute, we can actually fit more information into this CD. And then you got, 750 or 720 megs. I mean, yeah. I don't play CDs anymore, so I'm a little rusty on those figures. Then, the industry figured, hey, wait a minute, we can actually fit more music, more songs on a CD, which means that we can charge more money for it. And by charging more money, the CD sales, the prices started going up so high, and which coincided at when CD prices started climbing, coincided with some of the major artists renegotiating their deals because their recording contracts had gone, were about to be renewed, and so they started demanding advances, multi-million-dollar advances to re-sign with that label. So labels were basically saying, well, we'll give you this advance, and then they thought, well, we're going to have to recoup by raising the prices. Also, by adding more songs, means that you have more of a publishing cut. More money goes into publishing from the wholesale price of those records. So, instead of having 10 songs, now you got 15 songs, which means that your publishing cost for those songs for writers and publisher has basically almost 50%. Instead of 10 songs, now you got 15. That's 5 more songs, which is basically 50% raise on that. So as far as performance goes, I don't think it really changed that much, because you were still, there was still a separation between a record and a tour. Yeah, you would play about, maybe make 3 or 4 videos for any new release, but that's been going on since the 80s. If you had a hit record, you would still make at least 2 or 3 videos. By the time that I was touring with Whitesnake, we were making 4 videos per album. And those are expensive. I mean, and
especially then.
Back then,
back
those
then,
were like mini
very
movies.
expensive.
Yeah, especially by the end of the 80s, there was no guarantee that your video, no matter how big the artist was going to wind up on heavy rotation. So you could spend, $350,000 on a video that would be on rotation, not even heavy rotation, but on rotation for about maybe 6 weeks, which means that in order for you to extend your tour, because, the tour planning was like 6 months in advance. And if your record is not doing very well, somehow you have to pump up, your presence on radio and on MTV to promote your tour, because nothing gets butts in the seats like a hit record. There's no way that you're going to have especially back then. Nowadays, a lot of bands don't even release an album. They just keep playing their classic catalog. But back then, you were expected to put, if you were on tour, you're expected to have a record.
Right.
You tour to promote the album.
Right.
Now,
right, especially then, yeah.
Yeah, now you basically you make a record to promote the tour, or to give the promoter, because you got to go to a promoter with a story and say, hey, we have a new record out. Okay, well, we'll put you, we'll put a tour together.
Do you prefer session work or being in a band recording and touring?
Well, being in a band recording and touring, it's the best, because you want to play those songs live. And if you do session, you're basically, you hear the song once or twice and you record it, and that's it. Yeah, you're done. There's no more, there's more that your contribution to that is pretty much done, and because actually, and I can tell you this from having recorded a few big records, it doesn't matter how much pre-production you have when you go in the studio. You really understand the song, or the band really, really puts across what the song is all about when they go on tour and they live it, because now you're performing the song in front of people. Now you're communicating what the song is all about. And that's why, sometimes you listen to live albums and there is a certain chemistry, a certain magic that albums do not have. Albums might be a little too clinical, too under the microscope, each note, each layer. And then also what happens is, you have overdubs in the studio. When you're on the road, and I'm talking about, the bands that do not rely on pre-recorded music, playing along to that, which is just the band playing and singing, there's more room to expand your expression of what the song is about. If you have like 2 guitars, maybe 1 keyboards and a guy singing and background vocals and a drummer and the bass player, there's more room, because there's no overdubs, so there's more space to do things,
In past interviews, you have spoken about the fact that you would not have had the career that you've had without Randy Rhoads. And, was he the inspiration for you to write your book, Off the Rails? And what was your relationship with him like?
Well, I mean, if you can reverse engineer the question with the outcome of like, I took a year and a half out of my life to write a book for a friend, and so if you go like, wow, I mean, how many people do that? With no, I mean, there was no guarantee of making any financial gains from it or anything. You just did it because I had to. I had to write that book because nobody else did. That book specifically about Randy Rhoads. And actually, to answer the number one question I get asked, what was it like to play with Randy Rhoads? And that, when I travel around the world, that's all I hear. The fans want to know.
Of course. What it was like, yeah.
And I always used to walk away feeling like I did not say enough about Randy. So I figure, let me put down on a book everything that I can ever say about Randy Rhoads. And it's all there.
Okay,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have links to that in the show notes in the description so people can check it out. For our audience, obviously, that's comprised of musicians and people that want to get into the industry, do you have any pre-show rituals that you can share with us?
My whole life is a pre-show ritual. I'm already getting ready right now as we speak, for the shows I'm going to be playing. Next week I'm doing a charity events in Canada for this organization that I'm a part of. And then as soon as I get back from Canada, the following day I'm playing with the Guess Who at the Golden Nugget. And so it never ends. It's not like, okay, I'm going to do a show in an hour. I'm going to get ready for that. No, I'm always.
You're always in preparation mode.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I guess what I meant was, is there any particular things that you do to get yourself in the mindset? I mean, clearly you're in that mindset, I would assume, at all times, but if there was any specific things,
No, just because right. It's part of my, it's like breathing.
Exactly.
Okay, I breathe. Okay, that's part of the preparation. Yeah.
Okay. What about performance advice? I mean, can you give any performance advice? I mean, you're a man who has literally played for millions of people around the world in your career, and I figured you must have some sort of insights into what makes a great performance in your mind, and what makes one that was like that was, or there were problems or whatever, when you're on stage.
Yeah. Okay. Problems on stage. I mean, give me an idea of what a problem on stage will be considered.
Oh, I guess, you're not feeling it that night. You're not gelling with the other musicians, or something is like, blocking you, emotional, those kinds of things where, you're not connected. You're not connected to what you're doing.
Yeah, and it happens, but you have to realize that what keeps that from being the norm, it's that the healing qualities of music, the healing qualities of being able to communicate through music and to share that with an audience, and just as important or even more important with your band members. It's I always say I do the worst sound checks. Sound check, it's not showtime.
Right.
Right.
Sound check. I got my street clothes on, and we do a lot of flyaways, so which means that I see a lot of gear for the first time and hear it and plug in and try to get a continuation of the tone that I hear in my head, and I have in-ears, and sometimes not all amplifiers sound the same, and not all amplifiers are well taken care of with backline companies, and so it's like, okay, so that's what I go through during sound check, trying to like find that sweet spot out of my amp that fits in timbre wise with the rest of the group, and so that's my focus. Once it's showtime, all of that, it's secondary. I don't even think about that. It's all about the performance. It's showtime. It's all about what we're there to do. It's all about the magic and the chemistry.
Right, exactly. Okay.
Chemistry.
Okay. You mentioned that, you do a lot of flyaways, and I'm just curious for our audience who I think would be very interested in your particular situation, Rudy, is, what gear are you using these days when you're touring and performing, like with, ongoing things, not necessarily a flyaway, but you personally, what gear do you use? Yeah, I mean,
I'm a long time Ampeg SVT user. And one of the great things about Ampeg is that they are accessible around the world. You can go to any country in the world, and if there's a backline company, they will have an SVT available for you. And and in my case, they're very flexible. I mean, I play rock and roll. I mean, I've never been in a funk or soul band, so I don't know how an SVT sounds in a situation like that. But as far as what I do, I'm a rock player. It's perfect. It's it can deliver just about exactly what I'm looking for. And I say just about because it all depends on how the equipment is maintained by the backline company.
I see.
And beyond that, I have my different basses that I use currently. Even though I have my signature model with Spectre, our equipment. Okay, we use rental backline, but our guitars are shipped FedEx.
Right.
Oh, okay.
FedEx from gig to gig.
Wow.
Interesting.
And unless we're doing like 3 or 4 shows in a row, which means we're either driving to the gig or flying to the next gig, right? Then if we're flying, it goes under, with the rest with the luggage. Or if we're driving, that bass goes with me in the car. In whatever vehicle we happen to be using. And, but as the normal is that our equipment flies, our guitars, FedEx. And I've seen so many nightmare situations of opening up that case and finding a Les Paul with a busted headstock.
Oh my God. Yeah. Broken.
So I am not going to put my $3,000, signature bass, to suffer that. First of all, because it's a neck through. If the headstock, is busted, that's it. It's done. I am playing a wonderful with a guest who is a Yamaha BBP 3.4, and it's a bolt-on. Not only is it a bolt-on, it's 6 bolts in the back, which travels really well no matter what the climate changes that we have. For example, if one gig is in North Dakota, the next gig is in Florida, there's going to be a climate shift with your instrument. Yep. And I can easily fix if there's any tweaking that I need to do to the neck. I can fix that I've learned how to do that professionally. I don't mean professionally because I get paid for it, but I can fix my own gear.
Yeah, for sure.
In my hotel room, I got all these little tools, to work with it. So it's a very on the road. It's very road. It can handle everything, the rigors of touring, and it's a great sounding instrument. It's a passive, which is it's the sound that the band needs, and so I've been playing that on the road. I have my signature model acoustic basses with a company called Sawtooth, and they're wonderful instruments. I use the Aderios. I've been using the 170 SLs, bass strings. I think they're the most consistent, best strings available in the world right now. And let's see what else. I use an array of pedals. Lately, I've been using the dark glass bass pedals. Also, I use DC Electronics and Boss pedals. Let's see. Ultimate Ears, in-ear monitors.
In-ears, yeah.
Oh, they're the greatest, And let's see what else. That's pretty much it.
You're a journeyman. You've been a professional touring musician for most of your life. Can you share with our audience any insights that have really helped you to survive life out on the road over all these years?
Well, I enjoy touring now more than I ever did because by choice. I'm in a situation where I do flyaways, and it's really by choice because I spent a decade and a half on a tour bus, basically.
And the flyaways are like, for the audience, they're like weekend warrior gigs, right?
Yeah, well, we don't consider them weekend warriors. We just say flyaway.
Right.
This is what we do. Yeah, look, let's face it. Unless you're a major headlining band, I'm talking about Metallica and bands like that. The rest of us, our itinerary is pretty much playing A markets and the weekends, and then playing secondary markets on weekdays just to get from point A to point B. Because there's just not that many gigs, So, what we do in the Guess Who, we do a lot of casinos, a lot of performing arts centers. We do fairs. We do festivals in the summertime, and lately we've been, we did a cruise, rock and roll cruises. And we're getting booked to more cruises in the future. So it's not like we go and do an arena tour. We would love to do that. But even those are very short and usually in the summertime. And we're always, our calendar is full all year long.
You started a podcast a while back called 6 Degrees of Sarzo, and I'm curious, what was it that inspired you to start your own podcast? I believe you did it on Monsters of Rock Radio.
Yeah, actually, I had a podcast before
Dash,
6 Degrees.
Right?
Yeah, the Dash. That was my first attempt at doing interviews and so on. 6 Degrees of Sarzo is actually a radio show. It's because there's no podcast place to go and download them. So you have to listen to it live.
Oh, okay.
It's live streaming, yeah. And which is not my decision. That's the way that Monsters of Rock Radio works. It's live streaming through the Dash network. And but my podcast, which is still available, is just called The Dash, Rudy Sarzo, The Dash. And I started doing that because we're at the age, my generation, that some of us, unfortunately, are passing. And I started attending a few memorials, like Lemmy's memorial and Jimmy Baines and so on, and there was all these wonderful things being said about our friends and colleagues, and I'm sitting there and thinking, wow, wouldn't it be nice if they would be here to actually hear these things or have these catalog. And we are the first generation that can actually, like we're doing right now, we're cataloging this for future generations to listen to. Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart, they didn't have that luxury. We do. And we should take advantage of that, just to, because maybe somebody out there listening to this might be inspired or might find the answer to the question that they've been lingering about, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get into the music industry, or, might help somebody, go in the right direction. And so I that's why it's called The Dash, because it's celebrating my guests' life in music or whatever they happen to do. It's, if you look at a headstone, it has the birth date and the death date, and then there's this dash in between that, and that's life.
That's the life, exactly.
That's life. So that's what it was called, the dash.
The dash.
Great.
Absolutely.
And then I after I was doing that podcast for a couple of months, and then I got a call from the CEO of Monsters of Rock Radio, and invited me to bring what I was doing as a show on Monsters of Rock, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wonderful.
Rudy, professionally speaking, what have your biggest mistakes taught you? Biggest
mistakes? I don't look at them as a mistake. I look at it as a lesson. Because I always, first of all, you realize that it's a mistake or that you did something wrong, and do not repeat it, because you will do mistakes. If you're not making mistakes in life, you're not living, And that's what we're here for. And I guess I'm bound to do a few more mistakes because I'm still around, which means I'm bound to learn a few more life lessons, and then once I'm done with them, I move on to a whole different plane, of existence. And
or lessons, or the lessons that you learned from those mistakes. Yeah.
Lessons. Oh, a lot of lessons, but then again, most of my lessons are actually because I listen to people or watch situations or benefit from being in the company of outstanding musicians and business people. Yeah, sometimes you do not have to make a mistake to learn something. You just have to keep your ears open and your eyes wide open and just watch and listen and learn, Again, going back to the greats in the music industry that I've been associated with, like Sharon Osbourne and John Kalodner and Trudy Green, who managed Whitesnake. There's a lot of great people, and I got a lot of great advice from them. Maybe not directly,
but indirectly, seeing them, observing.
Yeah, being in their presence. Yeah.
Rudy, throughout your career as a musician, do you recall any books or films that have really resonated with you professionally speaking that you could recommend to our audience?
Books or films
that really resonated with you, that just really
you know what, I was part of a documentary called Hired Gun.
Yes, we saw that one. That was a great one. Yeah.
And I mean, when you make a documentary, you have no idea of what all the other participants are doing in their interview, So it wasn't until I watched Hired Gun that I realized the magnitude of the actual documentary, what I had to say. And I think a lot of what the meaning of the documentary is lost in the title, because, you get the idea that everybody in the documentary remains a hired gun. And actually very few remain hired guns, because, including myself, Steve Lukather, Ray Parker, the list goes on and on of the people that were interviewed. The rest, went on to put their own bands together and to have, successful lives with or solo artists, like in the case of Ray Parker. In his story, he was a music prodigy.
Oh yeah, he was a great session guy for many, many years before he had a solo career.
Working with Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder mentored him as a songwriter. Then it was radio, then Ray Parker and radio, and then Ray Parker just as a solo artist. And then you have Steve Lukather, who not only is he a session musician, he's one of the founding members of Toto, one of the most successful bands, and then still remain a session musician because he's a musician. Whether I love the challenge of walking in the studio and just this whole thing. Like right away, you have to come up with stuff or adapt to somebody else's vision of what your role is, for that song. It's incredibly exhilarating.
Yeah, very much
rather than to walking in the studio with a lot of pre-production with your band, and you doing what you're expected to do in that role as a musician in the band, which sometimes can be very limited because the band it's a sonic brand. You have to sound like the band. All of a sudden you cannot change your style and start playing things that you're capable of playing, but it's not expected, for your band, unless you happen to be in a band like let's say like Queen was. Queen could go into different styles of music. Right. So that the Beatles, I think the Beatles really set the watermark of the band who could do anything, and it was accepted and expected.
Yes. And they were successful at it. Yeah.
Yeah. But especially in the 80s, a lot of the so-called, our generation that became known as hair bands, that you were expected to play one sound over and over again. I mean, listen to AC/DC, which was the prototype of what the hair bands became sonically. Listen to Def Leppard, this basically making the same record over and over again. And fans love it, because that's the food that you were fed. And you wanted that. You wanted more of the same.
Yeah, and they did those 2 gigantic albums of Pyromania and Hysteria. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. I mean, there were so many after Pyromania that, gigantic records that they had, yeah.
Rudy, let me ask you, what advice do you have, and I'm sure you're asked this a lot, for someone who wants to pursue a career today as a professional musician? You can ask the same question to even a new musician, a modern generation musician. And I think we're pretty much going to give you the same answer. There's really no rules anymore. There used to be the rule of like, okay, you have to move to Los Angeles or New York, which were the big recording company centers. And the work was there.
Yeah, if you're in a rock band. If you were country, you have to move to Nashville. Nowadays, there's all of my, 90% of my rock and roll peers have moved to Nashville.
Yeah.
And they're not even working in the country music field. They just moved there, And it's so different now than it was then. I don't think you can really follow any of the old rules. You have to make new ones, and you have to reinvent yourself according to what your needs are. But as far as reaching an audience, we have the best vehicle today that we did not have 20, 30 years ago, which is social media.
Right. The ability to connect and reach. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I would say be as interactive with your audience as possible, which was completely the opposite strategy in the old days, even though I was part of the first generation that was heavy on meet and greets in stores. Quiet Riot was, man, we did so many in stores, in every city, every market that we played at. We would do an in-store before a show or on days off.
I remember in stores back then. Some of them got really crazy.
Yeah, and then we did not do that many in stores, in record stores with Whitesnake, but I did tons of them with PV Electronics.
Oh, yeah.
In
sure.
music stores. Yeah, Adrian Vandenberg and I.
Yeah, I think you guys did a tour together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did a bunch of
we were in we were in Whitesnake.
Right.
In the band.
Right. So
he and I would go to do PV in stores. As a matter of fact, we pioneered their in-store program. And so, I've always understood the importance of meeting your fan base. Nowadays we call them Facebook friends, and the people that support your music, just like I supported every band.
Rudy, what is the best way for people that, are interested in reaching out to you, get a hold of you?
Well, social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And my page always has me with my little dog. And it's me. It's not somebody else running it for me or anything like that.
Right.
Also, we do free meet and greet after the Guess Who show, if the venue allows it. A lot of times the venues, are not set security wise to do something like that. But if they are, we always do a free meet and greet after the show.
Okay.
And what else? There's anytime you see me at the airport. I do a lot of meet and greet at the airport. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you so much for doing this. And really? I just want to say really on a personal note, because, growing up, to me, you were such a huge influence to me as a kid growing up. And, your parents, as you recall, that I worked at the record store back in Miami. I used to work at this record store called Specs. And your mom and your dad, Rodolfo and Magnolia, used to come all the time there and visit and check out what was going on. And they were so proud of you. And, they were so nice because they helped get me backstage to all of these gigs where you were at and got to meet you. And, just me as a musician, it was such a huge influence to see. And I'm just so proud of what you've accomplished. Just, being another fellow Cuban American, and so many of my friends back home are so influenced, and people around the world. So I just want to tell you that they were a big influence, and you were a big influence in my career, because they were just so genuine, and I think that shows with you. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for that.
Yeah, my mom and dad were heavily influential on my perseverance and faith and not giving up.
Yeah, they were great people. I can't tell you how fantastic. Which you obviously know that, but just knowing them.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for doing this.
Thank you, Ritch.
We really, really appreciate it very, very much. It was a great conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you. God bless you both.
Wow, what a joy, Eric. What a joy to have spoken to someone of Rudy's not only caliber and talent, but of wisdom and experience, the knowledge that he has. So many things about this interview just struck me as not only valuable, but really sage advice from someone who's been there and been on this path for a very, very long time. A journeyman. A real journeyman. And there are not many of those left.
No.
Certainly not in the mainstream, because the mainstream has become about other things. But Rudy is like, it's like funny. I was talking about this very thing the other day where I was saying, like, probably the last journeyman that I can remember of the modern era is John Mayer.
John Mayer,
He's probably the last one of that ilk. Right. Who really is, exploring. It's not all just about him. Going out and touring with the Grateful Dead, doing different kinds of things with his music. But Rudy said a lot of interesting things. I thought, the whole thing about how you connect. You remember at the beginning of the interview where he talked about when he landed in LA from Miami, how he connected with other musicians.
Pre-social network, when there was another social network, which was going out, meeting people at the clubs. The Rainbow was the central hub, was like the Facebook of that day.
That's right. And that's how people did it. You went out, you socialized. You had to be a social person in terms of getting that kind of work, if that was to be your world that you wanted to have success in.
Yeah.
And Rudy knew that by going out to all those clubs. And he also said another thing, which I thought was really interesting. He said that, when he would meet ladies,
the females,
they knew
everybody. They were very well connected.
Very well connected. And they would introduce
other musicians
to them.
Right.
That was something that, that whole networking.
They were like the conduit.
Yeah, exactly. And that, because he said they knew everybody. And I thought that was really interesting. The other thing that I thought was fascinating about this was when he talked about the mindset that you need as a musician. This wasn't a kind of situation where you could phone it in. I remember him so distinctly talking about, if you do that, the audience will read that.
Yeah. Exactly.
If you have that attitude,
if you make this as just a job, correct, that people are going to see through that. And that also that you have to be passionate and loving what you do, which is obvious. And what I loved what he said was playing for the audience.
Yes, playing for the audience. And he never called it a job.
Right.
And it showed. And, I love that line when he said, if you're playing for 10 people, and he said, you got to remember, it's not that audience's fault that those other 9,990 people didn't show to the gig.
Exactly.
And it, when he said that,
reminds you of Van Halen playing.
Exactly. Yeah. I was just going to say that story that Ted Templeman says.
Right. That he went there was like 7 people there, but they played like if it was a fucking forum.
Exactly. And that was one of the things that drew Ted to signing Van Halen, is that it was a late show and they didn't have a packed house.
Right.
I think it's like, 10 people, 7 to 10 people in the audience. But they played as if they were at the Forum. Yeah. And that's about that consciousness. That's about that, not making it rote and not making it, just, okay, here we go.
Right.
So another really interesting.
Also about the point where he talked about, the trust, honesty, and dependability versus a talent when putting a band together.
Oh, my God.
And,
so interesting.
That trust is the most important ingredient. And, that musicians of a higher level that they know and trust, and how important that is.
Yes, and I also remember him speaking about the trust element with regards to early in the interview when he talked about that even versus talent.
Right.
He said, often a situation will arise where they will go with someone who they can trust to be dependable rather than the more talented person.
Exactly.
Who, maybe has a drinking problem or can't be relied on or, sometimes is on, sometimes is. That reliability is so important. And I've heard other people speak about that, where they will go with somebody who they like, who they can depend on, even if that person isn't as great of a talent, isn't as great a singer or a player.
Because you know you're going to get more out of them and more dependability and all that kind of stuff.
And that matters.
It does.
That matters a lot.
And also the final point, when he talked about insights on surviving life on the road all these years now, if anybody has been doing this longer, I mean, he's been doing it one of the longest, probably for 3 decades plus now. And, he feels like he's enjoying touring more than ever now, which I thought was interesting.
Absolutely. I thought that was really fascinating. He called it like weekend warriors.
Yeah, the flyaways is what he was talking about.
Yeah.
I made the mention of weekend warriors because a lot of the bands of that ilk are now doing these weekend shows where they'll play like a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Then they fly back and they're home the rest of the week. So it's the same kind of concept with the flyaways, but he was talking about where they were playing, maybe big markets on the weekends and then secondary markets during the week. So, yeah.
Precisely, but he's still finding a way to make it work.
Exactly.
Even though it's different now. And you know what? You have to remember, this is not necessarily a job, okay? It's a career. It's a life.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nikoka Bodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.